Everyone who has banned this book should feel nothing but shame. Shame. Shame on all of you. Hello everyone, welcome back to Spinning Iris and another episode of Banned, Challenged, and Burned, where I explore banned and repeatedly challenged books and the reasons why some people find them offensive. Here we go. Sherman Alexie's An Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, with illustrations by Ellen Forney. This novel is about 14-year-old Arnold Spirit Jr. living with his family on the Spokane Reservation in Washington. After some inspiration on his first day of school, he is determined to take his future into his own hands and decides to go to the all-white school 22 miles from the reservation. Junior has a lot to deal with, both on and off the reservation. He has to deal with bullying, he has to deal with poverty, hopelessness, incredible loss, alcoholism, his own teenage hormones, and, probably most importantly, his own identity. This story is both funny and heartbreaking. And don't worry, I'm not going to spoil anything just yet. It's also got some distinction as being one of the most banned books of the last decade. Just give you some ranking numbers here so you get an idea of how many people have challenged and banned this book over the years. In 2002, it was ranked number 2 on the American Library Association's list of frequently challenged books, ranked number 5 in 2011, number 2 again in 2012, number 3 in 2013, made it all the way to number 1 on the ALA's 10 most challenged books of 2014, and came to number 2 once again in 2017, and last report was number 9 in 2018, with a recent update from ALA marking it as the number 1 most challenged book of the last 10 years. Wow. This book, it's kind of amazing. So who is responsible for all of these challenges and bannings? Well, like most banned books, it's starting with the parents, in this case the parents of some middle school students and high school students. And then they get various school boards involved in the bannings. Let's see if I can find some specific ones here. Let's see, in 2009, the Antioch High School, Chicago, from parents of incoming freshmen. In 2010, Newcastle, Wyoming, the school board banned teaching it in the curriculum of Newcastle Middle School, but kept it available in the library. Stockton, Missouri, Stockton District School Board banned it. See, Richland, Washington, 2011, the school board removed based off of information from the Instructional Materials Committee, but reversed earlier decision after learning that some of the members had not read the book. Dade County, Georgia, 2012, removed from county libraries and high school reading lists. But the vast majority of the complaints are coming from parents, and I have a feeling a lot of these parents aren't actually reading the book, they are looking at snippets, or taking things out of context from what their kids are telling them. Okay, so it appears there were 10 reasons for parents and school boards banning this book. They are profanity or foul language, racism and racist language, descriptions of sexual acts and situations deemed sexually explicit, religious viewpoint, i.e. anti-Christian, depictions of bullying, violence, gambling, smoking, drugs and alcohol, AntiFamily, and unsuitable for age group. This is classified as a young adult novel, by the way. And now here we come to spoiler territory. I'll Try to keep it as light as possible. Don't want to spoil too much. These are specific examples from the text pertaining to the reasons for the banning and challenging. Let's start with the first reason, profanity and foul language. We get an example on page 21. Junior is being assaulted by 3 bigger, stronger, older boys, and he calls them major league assholes. Here's a lovely one from page 7. I wish I were magical, but I am really just a poor-ass reservation kid living with his poor-ass family on the poor-ass Spokane Indian Reservation. Here's an example from page 48. I thought you were on suspension, Dickwad, he said, which was Rowdy's way of saying, I'm happy you're here. Kiss my ass, he said. Junior. There are 2 really bad words on page 64, but I'm going to save those for the next reason, for obvious reasons. In terms of swear words, there features ass, damn, asshole, boner. Word retard is used as well. And a couple instances of the S word. There's also one use of the F word, one use of the N word, and a few uses of the other F word. Pretty tame profanity-wise, and definitely coming from teenage voices. The swearing is either spoken internally or verbally between the teenagers. There is one occasion where Junior does swear at an insensitive and probably racist teacher. Let's see. Reason number 2, racism and or racist language. Let's see. Page 46. During one week when I was little, Dad got stopped 3 times for DWI, driving while Indian. Between pages 63 and 64, Junior is referred to in the illustration by several different unkind words. The most tame probably being chief and tonto. Let's see, on page 64, a giant by the name of Roger throws an incredibly insensitive joke at Junior using both the F word and the N word, and it is one of the cruelest things I have ever read, but it is in here for a reason. It is a racist comment, but it is an important moment for Junior because it is the moment where he finally stands up for himself without Rowdy's help. Kids of all ages and backgrounds often say cruel things whether they mean it or not, and often because they've heard other people in their lives say it, whether it's a friend or a parent. What if this counts as racist? But I'd just have to dodge dirty looks from white kids while my sister would be dodging gunfire in beautiful Montana. Those Montana Indians were so tough that white people were scared of them. Penelope, the girl Junior has a major crush for, and who eventually becomes his friend, has an incredibly racist father. Let's see, page 115 and 116, Junior asks for advice about dating a white girl from his 2 best friends. Rowdy, who he's not currently on the best terms with, writes back, I'm sick of Indian guys who treat women like bowling trophies. Get a life. His friend Gordy does a little research for him and comes up with an article talking about hundreds of Mexican girls and a few white girls going missing. The guy who wrote the article says people care more about beautiful white girls than they do about everybody else on the planet. White girls are privileged. They're damsels in distress. So what does that mean, I asked. I think it means you're just a racist asshole like everybody else. Yeah, I guess here's another one. So okay, I'm not all goofy-eyed in love with white people, all right? Plenty of the old white guys still give me the stink eye just for being Indian, and a lot of them think I shouldn't be in the school at all. Unrealistic, okay? In short, the racism and racist remarks are highlighting that there are people indeed still in this country who are racist toward Native Americans, and that being exposed to people who are different ethnically, racially, culturally is ultimately beneficial. Reason number 3. Descriptions of sexual acts and situations deemed sexually explicit. Now, might come as a shock to you that there is actually no sex in this book. Let's see, the first incident occurs on page 25, I think. Where are we? Yep, page 25. Love the title of this chapter. Because geometry is not a country somewhere near France. Let's see. I spend hours in the bathroom with a magazine that has 1,000 pictures of naked movie stars. All photoshopped, I'm sure. And basically, he's letting the reader know that he is indeed a boy, and that he does masturbate. And how he is obsessed with right angles, and how his sister spoils everything that he likes. There's this later on, page 110. We held hands once in a while, and we kissed once or twice, but that was it. They held hands. They kissed. Oh my goodness, what will teenagers do next? He also admits that he does like looking at her. In fact, in a previous chapter, he's watching her playing volleyball, and he's super into it. Nothing descriptive, it's just admiring the beauty of her athletic form. And during his long staring, he actually gets to a nice little portrait. Was it wrong to stare so much? Was it romantic at all? I don't know, but I couldn't help myself. There is a moment where his father tells Junior's father tells him about how he met his mother. Then in a roundabout way, a little TMI. And then he drops this comment. That's one more thing people don't know about Indians. We love to talk dirty. It's really not that dirty, but it is pretty good. I'm not going to spoil it. There's page 225, which is a memory Junior's sharing about him and Rowdy joking about putting parts of their anatomy in knotholes of trees. I'm not a boy, so I don't know if that's actually something teenage boys do, but I'm assuming that they experiment on various things. Right, and this passage on page 96 is probably one of my favorites. Let's see. You read a book for the story, for each of its words, Gordy said, and you draw your cartoons for the story, for each of the words and images. And yeah, you need to take that seriously, but you should also read and draw because really good books and cartoons give you a boner. Boner is brought up throughout the rest of this chapter, but he does explain, not an actual, he clarifies, when I say boner, I really mean joy. And honestly, is he wrong? I mean, what bibliophile doesn't walk into a bookstore or library and just get an absolute thrill? A lot of the parents who protest this would have you believe that Junior is actually giving full-on instructions for how to do a blowjob. And other horrible things. Again, there is no sex in this book. Just teenagers talking about it, and one not quite explicit adult talking about it. Repeat. No sex in this book. Number 4, religious viewpoint, i.e. anti-Christian. Anti-Christian being opposed to Christianity or Christian values as a whole. This one's a little tricky. So basically what Christians are seeing is any mention of God or Jesus. This is probably the one that they see first and automatically say, no. And if God hadn't wanted us to masturbate, then God wouldn't have given us thumbs. So I thank God for my thumbs. That would be page 26. And this one, I suppose, it's about the teachers who work on the reservation. You can't teach at our school if you don't live in the compound. It was like some kind of prison work farm for our liberal white vegetarian do-gooders and conservative white missionary saviors. Then there's another one here. Mr. P isn't a Democratic, Republican, Christian, or devil-worshipping freak. He's just sleepy. Again, I don't know if this is what Christians are being offended by. I think it's just the masturbation thing. Maybe it's this one chapter where Junior's talking about his awesome grandmother. Epileptics were often shamans because people just assumed that God gave seizure visions to the lucky ones. And then the following sentence, gay people were seen as magical too. And then further down the page, still 155. Of course, ever since white people showed up and brought along their Christianity and their fears of eccentricity, Indians have gradually lost all of their tolerance. Maybe it's this one they're seeing. So these are on page 171. At this point in the story, Junior and his family have gone through 2 major deaths. So the whole family is in a very deep process of mourning. And I suppose a very Christian person might get offended by this. But listen to this and let's find out. My father went on a legendary drinking binge. My mother went to church every single day. It was all booze and God, booze and God, booze and God. And going down. I felt helpless and stupid. I needed books. I wanted books. And I drew and drew and drew cartoons. I was mad at God. I was mad at Jesus. They were mocking me, so I mocked them. And then there's honestly a kind of funny little picture down at the bottom. It's a lot of humor and a lot of sadness mixed in. Of course, this is probably what all of these angry Christians are ignoring about what's going on in this story. Primarily Junior's grandmother, and this is a spoiler, it's primarily Junior's grandmother being inclusive when it comes to people with mental disabilities, mental disorders, and homosexuals. And also wanting her family to forgive the man that killed her. Her final words. And then, remember Roger? Racist giant Roger? Well, later on, he does this. And Roger, being of kind heart and generous pocket and a little bit racist, drove me home that night. It's basically when his classmates found out that he was poor. Sounds like a very Christian thing to do. To take care of someone less fortunate. And then, of course, after another huge tragedy, waiting for his father to pick him up, because it's 22 miles in the snow, may or may not have enough gas to get there and back, I prayed to God that my father would come driving up in his old car. Please, God, please don't kill my daddy. Oh, do you remember that inclusive thing I mentioned before? Probably ignoring this too. All of those white kids and teachers who were so suspicious of me when I first arrived had learned to care about me. Maybe some of them even loved me. And I'd been so suspicious of them, and now I care about a lot of them, and loved a few of them. Doesn't sound anti-Christian to me. Perhaps it's the anti-Christians who are complaining about the pro-Christian values in this book. Maybe. On to number 5, bullying. Where am I? The aforementioned incident of Junior getting beaten up by 3 older guys. Let's see, of course, Roger the Giant's tasteless joke and initial name-calling. We also get a taste of what it's like for Junior very early on. Everybody on the res calls me a retard about twice a day. They call me retard when they are pantsing me or stuffing my head in the toilet or just smacking me upside the head. To clarify, beforehand, Junior's explaining his medical condition, as well as the fact that he has a lisp and a stutter. And then we've got some child abuse, which I suppose you could consider bullying. Junior asks his friend Rowdy, "What happened to your head?" I asked. "Dad said I wasn't listening," Rowdy said. "So he got all drunk and tried to make my ear a little bigger. And Rowdy is a bit of a meanie. He definitely lives up to his name, but given the fact that he lives in a very abusive household, it stands to reason that some of that carries out into the outside world. Very common, unfortunately. And then on page 41, Junior talking to Mr. P. "I don't like to cry," I said. "Other kids, they beat me up when I cry. Sometimes they make me cry so they can beat me up for crying." A little more about how Junior's being bullied on the reservation. The Res basketball fans were chanting, "Arnold sucks, Arnold sucks, Arnold sucks." And then they all collectively turn their backs on him. Then we get the most insensitive teacher, I suppose, in the history of teaching. This is after Junior's been through 2 major deaths and has missed several days of school for various reasons. "Oh, class," she said. "We have a special guest today. It's Arnold Spirit. I didn't realize you still went to this school, Mr. Spirit." And then the classroom response is perfect. Because this teacher is just as Arnold calls her. Number 7, violence. I suppose I could have lumped this in with bullying, but there is a little bit more. At a pivotal moment in the beginning of Arnold's progression through the story, he throws a book at a teacher. Also towards the beginning, Rowdy lives up to his name and smashes a minivan, so he doesn't hit Junior. But then later on, when he learns that Junior is transferring to the off-reservation school, he punches him. So on page 79, Junior is mugged on the reservation during Halloween. I suppose there's also the several mentions of Rowdy's mean behavior, how for every black eye he got, he gave 2 in return. I suppose you could also say Junior talking about how, spoiler, his father's best friend is shot in the face. There's no real descriptions, just shot in the face in a drunken brawl. Number 8, probably one of the more unusual ones. Gambling. So this one's in, I believe, page 10, and wanting to pay bills for his dog's care. "I was too young to deal blackjack at the casino." That's it. This is just after Junior learns that his sister has run off and gotten married with someone she just met. She married him because he plays cards? She said he wasn't afraid to gamble everything, and that's the kind of man she wanted to spend her life with. So, yeah. Suppose you could call that a mention of gambling. And there's one there just before Junior's classmates find out how poor he is. "Everybody in Reardon assumed we Spokanes made lots of money because we had a casino. But that casino, mismanaged and too far away from the major highways, was a money-losing business. In order to make money from the casino, you had to work at the casino." So, yeah, that's about it for the gambling. Kind of a lame complaint, actually. There's no actual playing of cards or gambling going on, just brief mentions. This one's a huge one. We'll lump these all together. Smoking, drugs, and alcohol. There are really no mentions of actual smoking. Judging from a picture of the coach in the book, he probably chews on chewing tobacco, and Junior does mention smelling cigarettes on his breath. Alcohol is mentioned many times, and alcoholism is a major theme of this book because of how pervasive and damaging it is to the community he lives in. So I'll pick some of the good ones. This is probably the one that most objecting parents pick out because it occurs early on. And Rowdy has dragged Junior off to the powwow. "Hey, let's go buy some bootleg whiskey," Rowdy said. "I got $5. "Don't get drunk," I said. "You'll just get ugly." And of course, both of Junior's parents are alcoholics. Say his mother's more of a recovering alcoholic. His father is definitely full in. There's a mention here of Junior's father's friend Eugene. Eugene was a good guy, and like an uncle to me, but he was drunk all the time. Not stinky drunk, just drunk enough to be drunk. He was a funny and kind drunk, always wanting to laugh and hug you and sing songs and dance. I guess this is a good description of what kind of drunk Junior's father is. Yet my daddy was an undependable drunk, but he'd never missed any of my organized games, concerts, plays, or picnics. He may not have loved me perfectly, but he loved me as well as he could. Then, of course, there's another mention of when another horrible tragedy strikes. Of course they had a big party. Of course they were drunk. They're Indians. And then, of course, this is the only mention of actual hard drugs that I really noticed. I knew that 2 or 3 of those Indians might not have eaten breakfast that morning. No food in the house. I know that 7 or 8 of those Indians lived with drunken mothers and fathers. I knew that one of those Indians had a father who dealt crack and meth. I knew 2 of those Indians had fathers in prison. I knew that none of them was going to college. Not one of them. Then the next one. Another unusual reason. AntiFamily. Let's see if I can find something. I suppose you could count this, except for a really great line in this chapter. He's mad at the world, he's mad at his circumstances, he's mad at his parents. In fact, he said he wants to hate them. But then he says this: "But I can't blame my parents for our poverty, because my mother and father are the twin suns around which I orbit, and my world would explode without them." Doesn't sound anti-family to me, but maybe it's this one they're thinking is anti-family. "My house is a safe place, so Rowdy spends most of his time with us. It's like he's a family member, an extra brother and son." Or maybe it's this one about Junior's sister. "After high school, my sister just froze. Didn't go to college, didn't get a job, didn't do anything. Kind of sad, I guess. But she is also beautiful and strong and funny. She is the prettiest and strongest, funniest person who ever spent 23 hours a day alone in a basement." Maybe it's when Junior tells his parents that he wants to transfer to Reardon, the school that's 22 miles off the reservation. And they say, okay. Oh my word! Supportive parents. Or maybe it's this one about his grandmother. "And do you want to know what the very best thing was about whelping it? My grandmother. She was amazing. She was the most amazing person in the world." Or maybe it's this one on page 207, where Junior's father tells him he loves him. And Junior says, "I love you too." Or maybe it's this one on a wider tribal family scale. "No matter what else happened between my tribe and me, I would always love them for giving me peace on the day of my grandmother's funeral." Now, you know what? I know what these complaining parents are complaining about. I've learned that white people, especially fathers, are good at hiding in plain sight. I mean, yeah, my dad would sometimes go on a drinking binge and be gone for a week, but those white dads can completely disappear without ever leaving the living room. They can just blend into their chairs. They become their chairs. So yeah. The last reason for challenging and banning: unsuitable for age group. Now, this novel is classified as for teen and young adult. Teen and young adult means that these books are aimed at children between the ages of 10 and 18. And topics of these novels can range from romance, sex, gender issues, bullying, drugs, to name a few. And of course, usually dealing with intense emotions, you know, like hormonal teenagers do. The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian has a protagonist that is a 14-year-old boy. Means he is a teenager. He is going into high school. And he is dealing with topics like bullying, alcoholism, and probably most importantly, his own identity, which a lot of teenagers have to go through. A lot of teenagers spend their whole high school years trying to figure out who they are, even beyond high school, in their later teens and into their 20s, figuring out who the heck they are. I believe this passage from the novel proves that this is a book meant for teenagers between the ages of 12 and 18. It is on page 83. Zitty and lonely, I woke up on the reservation as an Indian, and somewhere on the road to Reardon, I became something less than Indian. And once I arrived at Reardon, I became something less than Indian. 10 or 11-year-olds may not be old enough or experienced enough emotionally to fully understand and appreciate this novel and what's happening in it. On the other hand, this is exactly the type of book I would have picked up at age 10, simply for the title alone. You have to admit, it's a pretty cool cover, too. For backlash, we'll start with response from readers. Teachers and students are ones who are primarily responding to these challenges, as well as organizations supporting free speech. All these people are defending the right to keep this book in schools and libraries. Here's an example of a response. In 2008, the National Coalition sent a letter to the Crook County Superintendent in Prineville, Oregon, protesting the removal of the novel, urging them to reinstate it. In 2016, there's a PBS's American Experience interviewed Lynn Frick, a high school teacher. The question she answered was, what was the reaction within the school when this book was challenged? Here's her response. As always happens when there's a challenge to a book, it flies off the shelf. So kids were reading it and passing it to other kids to read it. Parents were reading it. Various book clubs were reading it. When it became public knowledge in the school that this was happening, teachers were pulling it off my shelf to read themselves. It has this groundswell. Overall, the book was well received by my students. And another rather public one in 2017 in Conejo Valley, California. An email sent to the Conejo Valley Unified School District Board meeting from the American Library Association's Office of Intellectual Freedom, the National Council of Teachers of English, and California Library Association, stating, these organizations strongly recommended take advantage of the opportunity to reaffirm the freedom to read by approving the recommended curriculum, including Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, in the classroom. By doing so, you will send a powerful message to students that in this country they have the responsibility and the right to think critically about what they read rather than allowing others to think for them. The book won that fight on a vote of 4-1. Let's see, the ALA had a number of questions for him regarding banning of books. The author's response to his stance on book banning and if it's ever justified in a school library. This is a general response to banning, but I think it does apply to this situation. In every situation, there's always an alternative book. The problem isn't that one parent doesn't want their kid to read the book. The problem is they want to control what every kid reads. And to the other half of that question, I have no objection to a parent not wanting their kid to read my book, but when they try to control a school's curriculum, that's when the fight is on. So the second they try to make a policy, no, I can't think of when it's acceptable, because whatever the text, you can teach and learn from it. I will say again, everyone who has ever challenged this book, or banned this book, or has done either without bothering to read this book, you deserve to feel nothing but shame. Reading this book was a roller coaster of emotion for me. One moment I'll be smiling and laughing at some funny moment with a family member, and then the next moment I will be crying over that same family member, sometimes in the same chapter. I cried so many times in this book, and it's been a while since any novel has done that. It got me on page 9 with the tears. Honestly wish I could have read this in high school instead of Catcher in the Rye. Remember, I had planned on doing a vlog on this book, but I just couldn't stop reading it. I got through one got through a few chapters, and I did a brief video, and then I think, oh, I'll stop in a few chapters, but I just could not put this down. I had to force myself to stop at the halfway point just so I could film my previous banned book video. Yes, there is profanity. That racist joke was a punch in the gut when I read it, and you know, it's supposed to be a punch in the gut. Junior's describing how he's feeling, so naturally we feel it too. We get the same visceral response that Junior gets. I wanted to punch Roger in the face too for the stupid joke. And again, profanity. It is the diary of a teenage boy. I'm sorry to say, teenagers do swear. Not always in front of adults, but they will swear in front of peers and in their own heads, in their own journals. It's hard to believe that a parent would think that this is pornography. I beg to differ. This is the farthest thing from pornography. I should know. I do recommend reading this book, especially if you're a boy. If you know any teenage boys, especially teenage boys who are having trouble reading or saying, oh, I don't like to read, introduce them to this book. They may change their mind. This may be their gateway book to other literature. It talks about real problems that real people face every day, and it presents it in a way that is easy to read and is pretty easy to understand. And it has an empathetic character that is likable, and even Rowdy, the mean one, is extremely likable. Heck, after the first chapter with Rowdy, I wanted to be his friend. And for all the controversy that this book has built up, it is a banned book worth reading. And you could say that Absolutely True Diary is this generation's Catcher in the Rye. Because, as we all know, not everything is for the best in this best of all possible worlds. Thank you for watching. Take care. And remember, share some hope. Share a book. Bye-bye.